I want to drop you right into a really specific, highly claustrophobic sensory environment.
Oh, setting the scene right away. Okay.
Yeah, I want you to imagine you are sitting down for your shift, right, in a facility known as Surpikov 15.
Right.
It's a windowless concrete bunker buried deep underground, maybe a couple of hours south of Moscow. And it is September 1983.
Not a great time to be in a Soviet bunker, honestly.
Oh, not at all. And the physical atmosphere in this room is just, it's awful. You've got this droning, low-frequency hum of massive early 80s mainframe computers.
The kind that take up whole walls, yeah.
Exactly. And the struggling industrial air conditioning is just, pushing the stale air around.
Right.
Plus the lighting is that punishing, buzzing, fluorescent glare that just makes everyone look slightly ill.
Yeah, that sickly green tint. And you were staring at an early generation electronic display map of the United States.
Yes.
And honestly, staring is pretty much the entirety of your job.
Right. I mean, it's the dead of night, just past midnight.
Yeah.
And your whole job is to monitor a network of early warning satellites.
The OCO system.
Right, the OCO system, parked up in orbit. You are essentially, and this is terrifying, a biological relay switch.
A human tripwire, basically.
Exactly. If the screens in front of you indicate that American intercontinental ballistic missiles have left their silos, you pick up a phone.
You report the launch to the general staff?
And you just let the machine of the Soviet military apparatus take over? That's it. You aren't asked to think.
It's a job defined by just crushing tedium.
Yeah.
You are sitting there shift after shift, waiting for an apocalyptic event that, well, statistically is never going to happen.
You aren't there to analyze grand strategy.
No, not at all.
Which brings us to the inciting incident of what we're looking at today.
Yeah.
It's September 26th, which is just an ordinary Monday.
Yeah.
And the guy in the chair wasn't even supposed to be on the roster.
He was filling in.
Yeah. And then, suddenly, the dead silence of the bunker just shatters. A siren goes off. The main screen flashes red, and this terrifying single word illuminates on the panel. It says, start, or, in English, launch.
Meaning one American missile is inbound.
Right. And before anyone can even process that one missile, the system updates.
It gets worse.
It goes to 2, then 3, 4, 5 missiles.
Wow.
5 nuclear warheads in the air, heading straight over the pole toward the Soviet Union.
Which means the man in that chair suddenly has this incredibly tight window. About 10 minutes, actually.
10 minutes to make a phone call.
Right. A phone call that, under the strict operating procedures of the time, would almost certainly trigger a full-scale nuclear counterstrike.
But he doesn't make the call.
He doesn't.
He doesn't pass the current along. So welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are exploring one of the most intense, claustrophobic historical events of the 20th century.
It really is like a thriller.
It is. Based on declassified records, military memoirs, and a whole stack of historical analysis, we're looking at the night a tired, off-duty Soviet officer decided not to trust his own computers.
And, maybe more surprisingly, why the entire military apparatus agreed to just bury that fact for a decade.
Right. So you're going to break down the architecture of these systems for us today, right?
Yeah, I'll be looking at the early warning networks and the actual structural doctrine of Cold War.
Because we really need to understand why these systems were designed to operate on such a terrifying hair trigger.
Exactly. And we'll wade into the historical debate, too. Like, did this one guy in a bunker actually save the world? Or is the reality of the situation something a lot more complex?
I love it. So let's start with that hair trigger.
Okay.
To understand the psychology of that bunker, we can't just look at it as like a software glitch. We have to look at the prevailing military logic of 1983.
The doctrine.
Right. Because the guy in the chair is operating under a doctrine known as launch on warning. I know we throw these Cold War terms around a lot, but how did that specifically function?
Well, we need to separate launch on warning from a related concept, which is launch under attack.
Okay, what's the difference?
They sound similar, but the distinction is everything. Launch under attack means you wait until a nuclear detonation actually occurs on your soil.
Oh, wow.
Or at least until your ground-based radar confirms a warhead is physically re-entering the atmosphere over your territory. You have definitive proof.
Which, I mean, that sounds a lot more rational.
It does sound rational, yeah. But mathematically, in the 80s, it was considered a losing strategy.
Why is that?
By the 1980s, both sides had developed these highly accurate multi-warhead ICBMs. If you waited for those to actually land, they would destroy your own missile silos.
Oh, right.
They'd take out your command and control centers, your communication grids. You would be essentially decapitated. You'd completely lose the ability to shoot back.
And the whole grim logic of mutually assured destruction just falls apart if one side thinks they can actually pull off a successful first strike without getting hit back.
Correct. So to guarantee retaliation, you adopt launch on warning.
Which means?
This means the moment your early warning satellites detect the hot exhaust plumes of missiles leaving the enemy's silos, you launch your own missiles immediately.
Before there's even a arrive.
Exactly. You empty your silos while the enemy's weapons are still in space. Your missiles literally pass their missiles in the void.
Man, it's the ultimate use it or lose it scenario.
Very much so.
But the flight time for an ICBM from the U.S. to the Soviet Union is, what, like about 30 minutes?
Yeah, roughly 30 minutes for a land-based ICBM flying over the North Pole.
So you have a 30-minute window from the moment of launch to the moment of impact. But the guy in the bunker doesn't get 30 minutes to think about it, does he?
Oh, not even close. The early warning satellites only see the initial boost phase of the missile.
The boost phase.
Right, the first few minutes when the massive rocket engines are burning really hot.
Okay, I see.
Once the missile leaves the atmosphere and the engines cut off, it goes cold. The satellite can't see it anymore.
So it's just coasting through space, invisible to the infrared.
Exactly. So the officer monitoring that satellite data only has a handful of minutes to verify the signal and report it to the general staff.
And then what?
The general staff then has maybe 10 minutes to brief the leadership, and the leadership has another few minutes to actually make the decision to launch. The timeline is just ruthlessly compressed.
So the system is structurally demanding this rapid, almost unthinking reaction. It's like a mousetrap. You just can't hesitate.
You're penalized for hesitating, yeah.
And that brings us to the specific context of September 1983. Because this didn't happen in a vacuum.
No, it certainly didn't.
It wasn't just a random Tuesday in some peaceful decade. I was looking through the geopolitical timeline in our sources, and the level of localized paranoia in the Soviet high command at this exact moment is just off the charts.
It's arguably the most dangerous period since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The whole atmosphere was just toxic.
Just 3 weeks before this incident in the bunker, we have the tragedy of Korean Airlines Flight 007.
Right, KAL-007.
A civilian Boeing 747 strays off course into Soviet airspace near Sakhalin Island. And the Soviet military, who are already on high alert, scrambles a fighter jet and shoots it down.
Killing all 269 people on board.
Including a sitting U.S. congressman. Which is just wild to think about.
It was a horrific event, and we shouldn't gloss over the Soviet mindset during that shootdown either.
What do you mean?
Well, they didn't just casually blast a passenger plane out of the sky for fun. The local commanders genuinely, deeply believed they were engaging an American spy plane that was probing their air defenses.
Because the U.S. did that a lot, right?
Constantly. The U.S. routinely flew reconnaissance missions right along the Soviet border just to test radar response times. So the Soviet military was heavily conditioned to expect those incursions.
So when the international backlash hits,
Yeah.
Reagan calls it a massacre. And the Soviets just double down, claiming it was an intentional U.S. provocation.
The diplomatic channels basically just froze completely over.
And this is on top of Reagan's rhetoric from earlier that year. He gives the famous Evil Empire speech in March. But it wasn't just words that had Moscow spooked, was it?
No, the rhetoric was backed up by some very aggressive shifts in strategic posture. You had the announcement of the Strategic Defense Initiative.
Which the media called Star Wars.
Right, Star Wars, a proposed space-based missile defense system.
Which to an average person sounds defensive,
Oh,
right?
right.
A shield. But to the Soviets, it's terrifying.
Oh, utterly terrifying. If the U.S. can build a shield that stops Soviet missiles, then the whole concept of mutually assured destruction is completely broken.
Because they could strike first and not get hit back.
Exactly. The U.S. could launch a first strike, use the shield to block whatever ragged retaliation the Soviets managed to scrape together, and essentially win a nuclear war. The KGB saw SDI as an inherently offensive weapon.
That makes total sense when you frame it like that. And simultaneously, NATO is preparing to deploy Pershing II intermediate-range ballistic missiles in West Germany.
Yeah.
Our sources highlight the Pershing II a lot. Why was this specific missile such a nightmare for the Soviet General Staff?
It all came down to proximity and speed. An ICBM fired from North Dakota takes 30 minutes to hit Moscow. A Pershing II and fired from West Germany takes about 6 to 8 minutes.
Wow. 6 minutes. That is nothing.
barely enough time to realize what's happening, and they were incredibly precise, too.
Really?
Yeah, they used a terminal guidance system, basically radar matching, that made them accurate enough to target hardened command bunkers.
So they were bunker busters.
Exactly. The Soviet leadership looked at the Pershing II and saw a weapon designed for one thing: a sudden, decapitating strike that would wipe out the leadership before they even knew they were under attack.
6 minutes is barely enough time to verify a radar blip, let alone hold a crisis meeting with the Politburo.
Right, so you have a leadership that genuinely believes the other side is trying to engineer a scenario where they can wipe you out without consequences.
In fact, the KGB had launched Operation Ryan, right?
Yes, exactly.
It was this massive intelligence gathering effort, specifically looking for signs that the U.S. was preparing a surprise nuclear attack. They were actively looking for the apocalypse. They expected it.
Which is exactly why the incident in Serpukhov 15 is so profound. The warning didn't happen on a lazy afternoon during a period of detente.
No.
It happened when the men at the top of the command chain were already holding their breath, literally waiting for the alarm to sound.
But I want to pause here for a second. Because when you look at the structure of all this, the hair trigger alerts, the 6-minute flight times, the total reliance on early warning satellites, a really clear theme emerges from the sources.
What's that?
We often frame the Cold War as this geopolitical struggle.
Yeah.
Washington versus Moscow. But the real villain here isn't necessarily one nation's ideology. The villain is the mechanism itself.
It's the inherent instability of the system. I totally agree.
Right. And to prove that this was a systemic issue and not just some Soviet technological failing, the sources point to a nearly identical event on the American side.
Oh, the Thule incident.
Yes. Let's talk about the 1960 Thule radar incident in Greenland, because I honestly didn't know about this, and it is simultaneously horrifying and completely absurd.
Ah, yes. The rising moon. This perfectly illustrates the fragility of early warning technology.
Set the scene for us.
So in 1960, the U.S. had just brought online the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, or BMUWS, in Thule, Greenland. It was a massive, incredibly powerful radar installation designed to look over the North Pole for incoming Soviet missiles.
And one night, the alert level just skyrockets. The system detects a massive, full-scale Soviet launch. The data says thousands of missiles are incoming.
I would panic at NORAD.
And it wasn't a Soviet launch, it was the moon.
The moon, yes.
I'm sorry, I have to stop you there. How does the most advanced military radar in the world confuse the moon with a nuclear attack?
It was basically a failure of imagination in the programming. The radar was sending out these incredibly powerful pulses. Those pulses traveled out into space, hit the moon as it was rising over the horizon in Norway, and bounced back.
Okay, but it's a giant rock.
Right, but the computers receiving the return signal didn't understand what they were looking at. They calculated the timing of the returning radar echoes and misinterpreted the immense size and distance of the moon as a massive swarm of smaller objects much closer to Earth.
That is just wow.
The system simply wasn't programmed to filter out celestial bodies. It didn't know the moon was a thing it should ignore.
That is wild, the idea that we almost ended human civilization because a computer didn't know what the moon was.
It's darkly comedic.
It really is, but it proves the point. Both sides chained their survival to technology that was fundamentally prone to these bizarre, unpredictable edge case errors.
And both sides knew it. The engineers knew these systems had flaws, but the military doctrine demanded they be trusted anyway.
Which brings us back to the bunker. Serpukhov 15, September 26, 1983. It's time to introduce the man who's actually sitting in the chair.
Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov.
Right. We established he wasn't even supposed to be there that night. Why was he there, and what was his actual day job?
Petrov was a duty officer for the Soviet Air Defense Forces, specifically within the division responsible for the satellite early warning network. But importantly, he was an engineer.
So he wasn't just a grunt.
No, he was a highly educated technical specialist. He wasn't a line commander whose entire career was built on reflexively executing standing orders.
Right. He's the guy who actually wrote the standing orders for the system, essentially. He was the chief analyst.
Yeah.
And someone called in sick, so the senior engineer had to pull a night shift monitoring the screens.
Exactly. And because of his background, he had an intimate understanding of the OCO system. He knew the hardware, he knew the software, and most crucially, he knew its history of unreliability.
Let's get into the weeds on the OCO system for a second. The specific satellite feeding data to Petrov's screen that night was designated Cosmos 1382.
Right.
How did it actually work? It's looking down at the Earth, trying to spot a launch.
Well, it used infrared sensors. It wasn't radar. The satellite is parked in a highly elliptical orbit, a Molniya orbit, which we can discuss later, but essentially it's looking down at the U.S. intercontinental missile fields.
Mostly in places like Montana and North Dakota, right?
Yes. It's looking for the massive, intense heat signature, the infrared spike of a solid fuel rocket motor igniting and pushing a missile out of a silo.
So Petrov is watching the data feed from this infrared sensor. The bunker is quiet. Then the siren hits.
The screen flashes start.
The system reports, with what the interface calls high reliability, that a single Minuteman ICBM has been launched.
High reliability is the key phrase there. The system is essentially telling the human operator, I have run the algorithms, I have checked the data, and I am certain. Proceed to protocol.
But Petrov hesitates. And as he hesitates, the situation escalates. The system reports a second launch, then a third, a fourth, 5 missiles total.
At this point, the physical reality of the bunker must have been pure chaos.
I can't even imagine.
You have flashing lights, blaring alarms, junior technicians looking directly at Petrov, just waiting for his order.
Try to put yourself in his shoes for a second. You are sitting there. The doctrine is launch on warning.
Right.
The protocol, which, again, you helped write, says you pick up the phone and inform the general staff of a confirmed attack. You know the political climate. You know the KGB thinks the Americans are plotting exactly this.
The pressure to just follow the flowchart must have been immense.
To simply become the biological relay switch you were trained to be.
But he doesn't. He has about 10 minutes before the theoretical missiles move out of the satellite's view. And in those 10 minutes, under a level of stress that would break most people, he engages in some rapid-fire deductive reasoning.
Yeah, the sources map out his thought process, and it's a brilliant piece of crisis management.
It really is. He essentially cross-examines the data his own system is giving him. The first pillar of his reasoning is purely strategic. He looks at the number of incoming missiles. 5.
Right. If you're going to start World War III, you don't send 5.
Precisely. We talked about decapitation strikes earlier. If the United States were executing a preemptive first strike, the core objective is to completely obliterate the Soviet Union's ability to retaliate.
You have to destroy hundreds of hardened missile silos, submarine bases, bomber airfields, and command bunkers simultaneously.
You would throw everything you have.
Yeah.
Thousands of warheads, a massive coordinated wave.
Right.
Launching a paltry 5 missiles makes zero strategic sense. It would do very little damage to the Soviet nuclear triad, but it would absolutely guarantee a massive civilization-ending retaliation from the intact Soviet arsenal.
It would just be a suicidal provocation.
Exactly.
I think of it like if you've decided you absolutely have to shoot someone who is also heavily armed, you don't just graze their shoulder and then stand there waiting.
Yeah.
You make sure they can't shoot back. 5 missiles is a shoulder graze. It just didn't fit the profile of a first strike.
So that's the strategic doubt. The second pillar of his reasoning is his engineering skepticism. He knew the ecosystem was relatively new, it had been rushed into service to counter the American systems, and it had a history of throwing minor glitches.
Because he helped build it.
Right. He knew the software was essentially a work in progress. He just didn't trust it implicitly.
And the third piece, which I think is the most technically compelling, is the lack of corroborating evidence. Because the Soviet Union didn't just rely on satellites in space. They had ground-based radar, too.
Yes, the over-the-horizon, or OTH, radar network.
How does that work in tandem with the satellite?
The satellites are the first tripwire. They look straight down from space and see the hot exhaust of the launch phase. But as the missile climbs and arcs over the curve of the Earth into space, it enters the field of view of the ground-based over-the-horizon radars.
Okay.
These massive radar arrays literally bounce radio waves off the ionosphere to see beyond the curvature of the Earth. They are looking for the physical metallic body of the missile reflecting the radar wave.
So Petrov checks with the radar operators.
He does. And the over-the-horizon radars are clean. They show absolutely nothing.
Now, I'm going to push back on myself here because the timeline is tricky. The over-the-horizon radars wouldn't necessarily see a launch immediately, right? There's a lag.
That's a crucial point, actually. There is a blind spot. The radar can't see the missile while it's still deep inside U.S. territory, hugging the ground during the initial boost.
Oh, I see.
It takes several minutes for the missile to rise high enough to clear the radar horizon.
So for the first few minutes, the fact that the radar shows nothing doesn't actually prove the satellite is wrong. It just means the radar can't see it yet.
Exactly. Which makes Petrov's decision even more agonizing. He is operating in the blind spot. He has to make the call before the radar can definitively confirm or deny the satellite's data.
But he takes all three factors, the illogical strike size of 5 missiles, his intimate knowledge of the system's unreliability, and the lack of immediate radar confirmation, and he makes his choice.
He does.
With the minutes ticking down, he picks up the phone to the duty officer of the general staff, and he goes completely against the protocol. He reports the alarm as a malfunction, a false positive.
Now, we should note that historical accounts vary slightly on the exact wording of that phone call.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some sources suggest he immediately called it a false alarm. Others indicate he simply refused to confirm it as an attack, stating he needed more time to analyze, effectively halting the escalation process.
But the operational result is identical. He stopped the momentum, he acted as a circuit breaker, and then comes the part of the story that just turns my stomach to think about.
The wait.
The wait. He's made the call. He's essentially bet the survival of his nation on a hunch about a computer glitch.
Yeah.
And now he just has to sit in that humming, fluorescent-lit room and wait to see if he was right. Because if he was wrong, in about 20 minutes, the communication lines are going to go dead, the bunkers are going to collapse, and his country is going to burn.
He later described it as a feeling of immense physical exhaustion, the adrenaline crashes, and you are just left with the terrifying reality of physics and time.
And the time passes. 20 minutes,
Yeah.
30 minutes.
Yeah.
The flight window for a Minuteman ICBM elapses. The ground-based radars stay clean.
There are no reports of detonations.
The sirens are eventually turned off. The bunker goes quiet again. It was a phantom.
The system had lied.
So once everyone's heart rate drops below, like 200, the immediate question in the bunker and at the general staff shifts. The apocalypse has been canceled, so now the engineers have a very serious problem to solve.
What did it actually see?
Right. What exactly did the multi-million-dollar OCO early warning system see? Because it saw something with high reliability.
And this is where the engineering investigation yields a fascinating, almost poetic answer. The culprit was sunlight.
Okay, walk me through this. How does a system designed to look for the thermal bloom of a nuclear rocket engine get confused by the sun?
It comes down to a perfect storm of orbital mechanics, meteorology, and the autumnal equinox. Let's look at the orbit of the Cosmos 1382 satellite. The Soviets didn't use geostationary orbits for these early warning satellites.
Why not? I mean, a geostationary satellite just sits in one spot over the equator. Wouldn't that be easier?
It would be, but from the equator, looking up over the curve of the Earth toward the northern United States where the missile silos are, you get a terrible viewing angle.
Ah, okay.
And worse, you are looking at the missiles against the warm, varied background of the Earth itself. It's hard to pick out the heat of a missile against the heat of the planet.
The signal-to-noise ratio is bad.
Exactly. So the Soviets use what's called a Molniya orbit. It's a highly elliptical orbit.
Meaning oval-shaped.
Yes. The satellite swoops down very close to the southern hemisphere, then slingshots way out into deep space over the northern hemisphere, moving very slowly at its apogee.
Okay, so it gets this really long hang time.
Right. This gives it a long hang time looking down at the U.S. from a very high, steep angle.
Looking at the U.S. essentially against the cold, black backdrop of space.
Precisely. It makes the hot plume of a missile stand out vividly. But on this specific night in September, right around the autumnal equinox, the geometry of the sun, the Earth, and the satellite aligned in a rare, specific way.
Oh, so?
The sun was positioned just so that its rays hit a layer of high-altitude clouds hovering over North Dakota.
And those clouds acted like a mirror.
They reflected the sunlight straight back out into space, directly into the infrared sensor of the Cosmos satellite.
But wait, infrared looks for heat. Does reflected sunlight look like heat to that specific sensor?
Yes. The early infrared sensors used a specific bandwidth that couldn't easily differentiate between the intense, sustained thermal radiation of a rocket engine and a perfectly aligned, highly concentrated glint of sunlight reflecting off the ice crystals in high-altitude clouds.
Wow.
The system registered a massive energy spike in the exact location of known U.S. missile silos. The software algorithms processed that spike, matched it to the expected profile of a launch, and triggered the high reliability alert.
That is incredible. The system worked exactly as programmed. The physics were real. It just fundamentally misunderstood the context of the data.
The designers simply hadn't anticipated that specific geometric reflection.
They hadn't built in the filtering logic for that edge case. They eventually had to rewrite the entire software architecture to cross-reference multiple viewing angles to confirm it wasn't just a localized reflection.
Right. It was a massive oversight.
So Petrov accurately diagnoses this edge case glitch in real time, relying purely on logic and a deep understanding of his system's flaws. He saves the world from a catastrophic error. Which brings us to the aftermath.
The bureaucratic aftermath.
Yes. If you are Petrov, you are probably expecting at minimum a parade, or at least a very nice medal and a promotion to general.
One would assume his career would be fast-tracked immediately.
But the bureaucracy of the Soviet military is a unique beast. The sources detail exactly what happened. Initially, in the bunker, the commanding general arrives, assesses the situation, and actually praises Petrov.
He tells him he did a good job keeping his head under pressure.
But that praise evaporates the moment the paperwork starts moving up the chain of command. Because there's a problem. Petrov is formally reprimanded. He is disciplined.
And what was the official charge?
Failing to properly log the incident in the military war diary while it was happening.
Ah, a clerical error.
Yes. While he was cross-referencing radar data, analyzing strategic strike profiles, and trying to prevent the nuclear annihilation of the Northern Hemisphere in a 10-minute window, his handwriting apparently wasn't up to code.
Unbelievable.
He didn't fill out the logbook in real time. It is the most Kafkaesque, suffocatingly bureaucratic response imaginable. Officially, he wasn't punished for insubordination because he was technically right, but he wasn't decorated either. He was just slapped on the wrist for bad paperwork.
It seems absurd, but if we analyze the institutional psychology of the Soviet military apparatus, it makes complete cynical sense. This is a classic example of institutional face-saving.
Explain that, because to me it just looks petty.
It is petty, but it's driven by structural embarrassment.
Right.
Think about the engineers and the high-ranking officials who commissioned and built the Oko system.
Right.
This was a multi-billion ruble prestige project. It was the crown jewel of their early warning network. It was supposed to be infallible.
And Petrov essentially exposed it as a fragile toy that got confused by some sunny weather.
Exactly. To reward Petrov, to give him a medal, would require the high command to publicly, or at least internally, admit that the system was fundamentally flawed.
They'd have to admit they almost ended the world over some clouds.
Right. It would require admitting that the Soviet Union nearly triggered a global holocaust because of a software oversight. In a rigid, top-down, ideologically driven hierarchy, admitting that level of vulnerability is politically impossible.
There's a Russian cultural concept to this, isn't there, Franyo? The idea of a mutual pretense or a lie that everyone knows is a lie, but everyone agrees to maintain for the sake of the system.
Yes, Vranyo. Acknowledging his heroism shatters the illusion of competence. So it was far easier to treat the entire near apocalypse as an embarrassing administrative hiccup.
Just sweep it under the rug.
The commanding officers who were responsible for the faulty system formed the investigative committee. They weren't looking for a hero, they were looking for a scapegoat, or at least a way to quietly make it go away.
So Petrov becomes a bureaucratic inconvenience. He is quietly sidelined. He's moved to a less sensitive post. His promising career stalls out entirely.
And the entire incident, the glitch, the 10 minutes of terror, it is highly classified, locked away in an archive.
The ultimate cover-up. Not to hide a crime, but to hide an embarrassment.
Which leads to one of the most surreal aspects of this whole event. Because it was classified to protect the pride of the system, the world woke up on September 27th completely oblivious.
People in Moscow, in Washington, in London, they went to work, they read the newspaper, they complained about the traffic, having no idea that their existence had hinged on a 10-minute countdown the night before.
The world continued, completely in the dark. And it stayed in the dark for a very long time. The Cold War ended, the Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, and still, nobody knew about Stanislav Petrov.
It took an entire decade for the story to break. And when it finally did, it wasn't through some dramatic declassification or a whistleblower. It leaked out almost by accident.
How did it finally surface?
Well, in 1998, Yuri Votintsev, who was the former commander of the Soviet Air Defense's missile defense units, the guy who had initially praised Petrov in the bunker, published a book of memoirs.
Okay.
And buried in those memoirs, just a passing anecdote, was the story of the night, the Oko system malfunctioned, and the duty officer who refused to pass the alert.
It's remarkable. A footnote in a retired general's memoir reveals one of the closest calls in human history.
Yeah.
And what was Petrov's life like during those intervening 15 years?
Not glamorous. After his career stalled, he suffered a nervous breakdown. He retired from the military early. His wife passed away from cancer.
Oh, that's incredibly sad.
He lived in a modest apartment in Frezino, a town outside Moscow. He was scraping by on a meager military pension in the chaos of post-Soviet Russia. He wasn't giving speeches. He was just a guy living a quiet, difficult life.
But once Wotantsev's memoirs were translated and journalists caught wind of the story, that quiet life ended, didn't it?
It did. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the international media found him. The narrative of the man who saved the world took hold.
The media loves a hero story.
For sure. He started receiving the recognition that his own government had denied him. He flew to the U.S. and was given a World Citizen Award at the UN. He received the Dresden Peace Prize in Germany. He was even the subject of a major documentary in 2014.
A surreal reversal of fortune in his twilight years.
But even with all that international acclaim, he remained incredibly humble, almost dismissive of the hero label. And when he passed away in May of 2017 at the age of 77, it barely made a ripple. Yeah. The global media didn't even report his death until September of that year, 4 months later. A German friend happened to call his apartment to wish him a happy birthday, and his son answered the phone and said he had died. The man who arguably saved civilization slipped away almost unnoticed.
Which brings us to a really critical juncture in this deep dive. As we look at the UN awards and the documentary titles calling him the man who saved the world, we have an obligation to interrogate that myth.
You want to deconstruct the lone hero narrative.
I do, because history is rarely a Hollywood script. The question we have to ask objectively is, did Stanislav Petrov single-handedly stop World War III?
Okay.
If he had picked up the phone and reported a confirmed attack, would the missiles have launched?
What do the experts say?
The sources cite several prominent nuclear historians and military experts, notably Pavel Podvig, who runs the Russian Nuclear Forces Project. And Podvig presents a very strong structural counter-argument.
Lay it out for me.
The argument is that the Soviet command and control system, specifically the Kazbek system, which links the early warning networks to the nuclear briefcases held by the leadership, was designed with multiple safeguards.
So it wasn't just a straight line from Petrov to a launch button.
No, Petrov was a crucial node, yes, but he was only one node.
He didn't have his finger on the actual launch button.
Exactly. He was merely generating the intelligence report. If he had called the general staff and said, "I confirm 5 missiles," the general staff would not have simply blindly mashed the launch button.
What would they have done?
Podvig argues that the military leadership would have demanded corroboration from the over-the-horizon radars. They would have convened an emergency assessment.
They would have looked at the strategic illogicality of a 5-missile strike, just like Petrov did.
Precisely. The Soviet leadership was cautious. They understood the gravity of the decision. Many experts firmly believe that nobody in the Soviet high command would have launched a civilization-ending strike based solely on data from a single satellite system, especially a system they knew was prone to errors.
So the argument is that the system would have caught the error.
Right. Therefore, the argument goes, Petrov didn't save the world, he just prevented a very tense, potentially dangerous false alarm from reaching the general staff. The system would have caught the error eventually.
Okay, I hear that.
Yeah.
I completely understand the structural, procedural argument that Podvig and others make. It makes logical sense on paper.
But you disagree.
I am going to push back on this pretty hard because I think it ignores the terrifying psychological reality of the moment.
You don't buy the fail-safe argument.
I don't buy it in the context of September 1983, because we are not talking about a flowchart operating in a sterile laboratory. We're talking about terrified human beings operating under immense cognitive load.
You're referring to the localized paranoia we discussed earlier.
Exactly. Go back to the mindset of the general staff. Yuri Andropov, the Soviet leader, is deeply paranoid, convinced Reagan is planning a preemptive strike. Operation Ryan is actively feeding confirmation bias to the leadership, telling them an attack is imminent.
Tensions were at an absolute peak.
The military is humiliated and on edge after the KL-007 shootdown. Pershing 2-second missiles are looming in Europe. The psychological environment is a powder keg.
It was a system primed to expect the worst.
Right, so imagine Petrov does pick up the phone. He calls the general staff and says, "The computers say it's real, and I am formally confirming an American launch."
Okay.
You inject a verified, high-reliability warning into a room full of generals who are literally losing sleep waiting for that exact warning. What happens to their rationality?
The psychological pressure becomes a factor in their decision-making.
It dominates their decision-making. Yes, the procedures require corroboration, but under the panic of a 6-minute timeline, do procedures hold? Or does groupthink take over?
That's a fair point.
Does someone say, "The Americans are trying to sneak a decapitation strike past our radars, we have to launch now"? Passing a confirmed report up the chain wouldn't just be an information transfer. It would be tossing a lit match into a room full of gasoline vapor.
It fundamentally alters the dynamic of the crisis.
Exactly. Maybe they don't launch immediately, but the risk profile skyrockets exponentially. Petrov stopped the momentum at the absolute lowest level. He kept the match away from the gasoline.
He de-escalated before escalation was even an option?
Yes. So while Podvig might be technically right that the system should have caught it, Petrov ensured that the system didn't have to catch it under extreme duress.
That is a very compelling counterargument. It really highlights the difference between theoretical doctrine and human psychology under stress.
So how do we synthesize this? Who is right?
I think the truth lies in a much quieter, stranger synthesis of both views. The truthful version of the story isn't the cartoon action hero narrative. Petrov didn't wrestle the launch keys away from a madman, but he didn't just file a routine report either. The profound nature of his action lies in his refusal to be what the system demanded he be.
He was designed to be a switch, and he refused to flip.
Exactly. He was explicitly asked by his government and by the architecture of the Cold War to relay the current of an automated system without thinking. But in the critical moment, he chose to apply human doubt.
He asserted human logic over a machine's mathematical certainty.
Right. He was a human being in a system designed to eliminate humanity.
And the thing that truly haunts me, the detail I just can't shake, is the absolute uncertainty of it all. Because of the secrecy, because of the rigid bureaucracy, we genuinely cannot know for sure what would have happened if he had made the call.
History is defined by counterfactuals we can never test.
Think about the variables. What if the guy on shift that night wasn't an engineer?
What if he didn't know the system was buggy?
Exactly. What if he was a rigid, by-the-book line officer who implicitly trusted the hardware and feared his commanders more than the data? What if he just followed protocol and pushed the alert up the chain?
It's a terrifying what if.
We don't know what Andropov would have done. We don't know what the general staff would have done. We survived based on a roll of the dice regarding who was sitting in a specific chair on a specific night. And that uncertainty is its own kind of terror.
It reveals the terrifying fragility of the illusion of control. We build these massive, complex architectures to make us feel secure, but they are incredibly brittle at their core.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's pull all these threads together. We've spent the last hour looking at a night where human civilization was arguably spared by a bizarre cocktail of circumstances.
A very lucky cocktail.
It was spared by a tired engineer's critical judgment. It was spared by the sheer luck of a scheduling conflict that put him in that chair. And it was spared by deliberate, insubordinate disregard for strict military protocol.
And the reward for that survival was a reprimand and a 10-year cover-up.
Which makes you rethink the nature of history itself. We are taught about the loud history, you know. The treaties signed with giant pens, the battles, the speeches.
The things that make the news.
But this story proves that some of the most consequential moments in human history, the moments that decide whether there is a history to write about tomorrow, are silent. They happen in locked rooms.
Away from the cameras.
On September 26, 1983, there was no massive headline, no monument, just a man in a humming bunker looking at a screen and deciding that the machine was wrong.
A quiet decision that allowed tomorrow to happen.
So as you go about your day, I'm going to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Why does a Cold War anecdote about old satellite technology matter to you right now?
It's a great question.
Stanislav Petrov's saving grace. The specific reason he didn't pull the alarm was that he intimately understood the flaws of the technology he was using. He knew the software was brittle. He knew the sensors could be fooled.
He had the technical literacy to distrust the machine when it mattered most.
Right. He understood the limits of automation. But look at the trajectory of the world we are building today. We are accelerating into an era where we are handing over incredibly complex, high-stakes decisions to automated systems.
To black box algorithms and to artificial intelligence.
We are embedding these systems into the core infrastructure of society. We use them in financial markets for algorithmic high-frequency trading. We use them in healthcare for diagnostic imaging. We are putting them in autonomous vehicles.
It's everywhere.
And perhaps most chillingly, militaries around the world are actively developing AI-driven target acquisition and autonomous weapons systems. We're building systems that process data millions of times faster than the human brain, and we are increasingly culturally conditioned to trust their outputs implicitly.
We're building vastly more complex, faster switches.
Exactly. And the algorithms are getting so complex that even the engineers who build them often can't explain exactly how the AI arrived at a specific conclusion.
The black box problem.
So the question we have to grapple with is this. In our rush to automate the world, have we designed our modern systems to allow a human being to say no when the screen flashes red?
That's the real fear.
Are we still cultivating people to have the critical structural doubt of Stanislav Petrov? Or, through our blind faith in the infallibility of data and AI, have we finally built a doomsday machine where the human relay can no longer pull the plug? If the algorithm decides it's time to launch, who is left in the bunker to doubt it?
Something to think about.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning the systems around you. We'll talk to you next time.